Hi, and welcome to the Brisbane Professionals Podcast. This is a podcast brought to you by SMS Law, going through the legal secrets that will benefit you and your clients, as well as having a little bit of fun as we go. This podcast is designed to educate you on, number one, complicated legal terms that we will explain in an easy to understand manner. Two, to understand why you do things from a legal perspective in your business. And three, to help you develop a plan for the future success of your business. Our mission is to help empower small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time that it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. This podcast is all about empowering you and your business with knowledge and tools to ensure that that doesn't happen to you or to your clients. Let's begin, shall we?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Brisbane Professional Podcast. My name is Craig Mason from SMS Law. I have with me Jeremy Stratton from SMS Law as well. Please say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're having an awesome day.
We are. Jeremy, thank you for hoping that. Today we're talking about licensing agreements, and this is about intellectual property, licensing the intellectual property, not about the use of like a license to occupy or something like that. This is about licensing the intellectual property. So we just want to touch on a few points, and we'll explain, what it is and what's the difference between that and a franchise agreement, and a couple of other things. So, Jeremy, do you want to kick off with a bit about a licensing agreement, and does your business need one?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So it's a fairly simple question to answer. If you're going to allow someone else to use your intellectual property, say your logo or your systems and processes, and Craig will go into the difference between a license and a franchise in a minute, and you don't want to go down a franchise route, then you use a license agreement. So a license agreement, you license the person to use your intellectual property. And so basically where you might want to allow someone to do that, and you want someone to operate under your brand, but you don't want to have a lot of control, that's the time to do one. And that's really the time that you want to use a licensing agreement to make sure that you're protecting your IP and making sure that the person who you're dealing with is using it properly. So Craig, just to give some context on that, do you want to talk about what the difference is between a license agreement and a franchise?
Yeah. So as I said, licensing, from what we're talking about, is where the rights to the intellectual property, so trademarks, designs, are sold by the actual person that owns it to another entity for them to use for their own benefit. Franchising involves a lot more control from the franchisor, and they're allowing the franchisee basically to use all of the franchise material to set up the particular business, and there's all sorts of controls over what they can do. So with a license agreement, they still own the rights, but they're granting permission for the person to use it. Whereas a franchise agreement is an actual quite a lengthy agreement between the franchisor and the franchisee. And they're governed by, and the biggest difference is probably the governance. It's all governed by particular industry codes, depending on where you are. So you've got the Franchising Code of Conduct in Australia, and you've got to make sure you comply with all those as a franchisor and a franchisee for that matter. And it's a lot more regulated than a license agreement, which is not regulated at all in the sense that both parties go into it with all the information and they settle on an agreement and goes from there, whereas a franchise agreement, they've got to comply with the code of conduct. I think they're probably really the main differences. Jeremy, what was the next thing we want to talk about? What do you need to have included?
Yeah, so what do you want to have included in a license agreement? And really, you've got to define what you're actually licensing the person to use. So what is the intellectual property that you're licensing them to use? how are they paying you for that? So what payments are they going to give you? Are they paying you a royalty fee? Is it a one-off payment, or is it a percentage of profits over time? Also, and Craig will talk about it in a minute, the term of the agreement. That's important. What happens if there's a dispute? Say if there's a dispute between the parties, you want to have how that's going to be dealt with in the license agreement. And also, if there's a dispute from someone else about the intellectual property, you want to set out in your agreement exactly how that dispute is going to be dealt with. Because if you've licensed your intellectual property to someone else to use, and then someone comes to them and says, hey, wait a second, that's my intellectual property, you need them to basically tell you about it so that you can deal with it. So you need to deal with all of those systems and procedures for how it's going to be used. And you've got to be very careful on what restrictions you can put on place for someone using your intellectual property under a license agreement. As Craig said, that could be a franchise. However, you can put some items in there. And this is an area where, as Craig said, in Australia, we have the franchising code of conduct. In other countries, they're actually quite not that regulated in the US and the UK. Certainly not as much as in Australia. And so you've got to be really careful, say, using a license agreement that you find on the internet, and that might have been written for under US law or UK law, that may be a lot more liberal than what you can do in Australia. So you've got to really be careful on the terms that you include, and make sure that they actually apply in the country that you're doing it in. And if you're in Australia, and this is all about the Brisbane Professionals podcast, so hopefully, most of our listeners will be from Australia. You need to make sure that you're using the correct document for that business type and the law in the area that you are. So there's a lot more that goes into a license agreement. I'm not going to go through all the terms, but definitely seek advice to make sure that it is proper and that it doesn't impinge on being a franchise or any other sort of agreement. So Craig, do you want to talk about the last point about how long should the term be?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. It depends on how long you want it to be for a license agreement. It's probably more likely for a licensing agreement to be for a shorter period of time, say less than 3 years, or it might be for a longer period of time, over 5 years. Whereas a franchise agreement, for instance, is generally the ones we see are sort of 3 to 5 years. And then they need to be renewed. Whereas a licensing agreement you could have theoretically for 6 months. It's unlikely that a franchise agreement, for instance, is going to be for 6 months because it takes that long just to set it all up as a business and go from there. So it's likely to be a shorter period of time or a longer period of time than 5 years, and a franchise agreement's most likely to be 3 to 5. But it really, for a license agreement, you've got more flexibility there as to how long it's going to be and how long the parties agree. But it's just important that it's in the license agreement as to how long it's going to be and whether or not it be extended or renewed, and those sorts of measures need to be in there as well. So it depends how long you want it to be. All right, that's it for us today. Jeremy, you didn't have anything else you wanted to say about the licensing agreements?
No, I think other than they are fraught with danger, especially in Australia, so make sure you get advice. These aren't the kind of things that you just pull off the internet, because otherwise you might fall afoul of the law.
You don't want to do that, that's for sure. Get some advice. Excellent. All right, that is it for us today. Thanks for joining us. If you want to rate and review the podcast, please do so. Jump on wherever it is you're getting the podcast from and look for the stars and go towards the 5 and press that. If you feel so inclined. Also follow us on Facebook, or like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. That's SMS Law. Search for either Jeremy or myself on LinkedIn and connect through there. As I've said on previous shows, we release other information and questions and give answers and that sort of stuff through that. So jump on there and become part of the community. We welcome all comers. All right, that is it for us today. We'll see you next time.
See you next.